If you enjoy walking into forbidden libraries and leaving with questions that follow you home, stay. Tonight, we trace a whisper to its source, though the source may prove to be an absence where an author should be. The question seems simple enough. Who wrote the Necronomicon? But like touching a spider's web in darkness, the moment you grasp one strand, you feel the entire structure trembling around you. You know the silhouette already. The mad Arab, the desert manuscript, the translations that burned libraries and broke minds across centuries. But these are merely the costumes worn by something that refuses to hold a single shape. Tonight, we discover that asking who wrote may be asking the wrong question entirely. Perhaps the better question is, what writes through willing hands when the veil grows thin? H.P. Lovecraft claimed he dreamed the name in 1922, waking with Necronomicon complete on his tongue like a coin already minted. In letters written under Providence's electric lights, he spun the genealogy. Abdul Alhazred's Al-Azif, composed in 8th century Damascus, Theodorus Philetas's Greek translation, Olaus Wormius's Latin rendering. Each name a stepping stone across dark water, each translation a door opening onto deeper chambers. But here, the comfortable narrative begins to crack. The name Al-Azif, Lovecraft's supposed invention, refers to the night sounds of desert insects, the thin piping that desert winds coax from holes in worn stone. Not music you dance to, but a reminder that the world has many small mouths. That language was always someone else's breath first. The title itself suggests not composition, but transcription, the capturing of sounds that were already there. Consider the weight of this. If Lovecraft merely recorded what he heard in dreams, then the true author is not a man, but the dreaming itself. The crawling voice that speaks through the spaces between waking and sleep, between one mind and another. It is the principle of transmission made manifest, the idea that some knowledge exists in the gaps between thoughts, waiting for a consciousness prepared to receive it. Touch the spine of any book on your shelf. Feel the ridge where pages meet binding. The Necronomicon exists in that ridge, in the space between what is written and what is read, between author and audience. It is not a text, but a behavior, the way certain ideas move through susceptible minds like water through limestone, leaving behind chambers and passages where none existed before. The evidence accumulates slowly, like sediment. Fragments of Necronomicon-style passages appearing in medieval manuscripts that predate Lovecraft by centuries. References to the mad Arab in Renaissance grimoires. Astronomical observations in ancient texts that match the book's impossible cosmology. Either history is riddled with anachronisms, or something has been whispering the same truths across time, finding new voices for old songs. Feel the air around you shift slightly, the way it does when someone enters a room behind you. That subtle change in pressure, in possibility. The crawling voice operates like that, not as sound, but as alteration, not as message, but as medium. It teaches by changing the listener, not by conveying information. And you, by asking this question, by following this thread, have already begun to change. The stage is larger than one figure, one century, one culture. Every time someone speaks the title Necronomicon, something responds. Not with thunder or revelation, but with a subtle adjustment in the fabric of attention itself. The book writes itself through anyone willing to serve as its temporary scribe, its momentary voice. The question of authorship dissolves into the recognition that we are all potential vessels for something that has been speaking since before humans learned to listen. This recognition carries particular weight when we consider the persistence of the phenomenon. Scholars who attempt to trace the text's origins find themselves following circular references, discovering manuscripts that should not exist, encountering footnotes that reference sources no library claims to hold. The harder they look for a definitive origin, the more the evidence seems to scatter like shadows, fleeing lamplight. The desert waits in this equation not as mere setting, but as principle. The empty quarter where Alhazred supposedly wandered represents more than geography. It is the void between thoughts, the silence between words, the space where consciousness encounters its own limits and discovers what lies beyond them. In that vast emptiness, the distinction between inside and outside, between self and cosmos, begins to dissolve. Consider the mathematics of coincidence. When the same cosmological insights appear independently across cultures separated by centuries and continents, when identical geometric relationships surface in texts whose authors could never have communicated, when astronomical observations align with impossible precision, at what point does coincidence become pattern, and pattern become recognition of something fundamental? The crawling voice speaks through these patterns using whatever cultural materials are available. In medieval monasteries, it whispers through illuminated manuscripts. In Renaissance workshops, it guides the hands of alchemists and astrologers. In modern times, it adapts to new forms of transmission, finding expression through whatever medium consciousness has developed for storing and sharing information. This adaptability explains why attempts to suppress the Necronomicon have consistently failed throughout history. Physical copies can be burned, but the patterns persist. The knowledge exists not in any particular vessel, but in the spaces between vessels, in the connections that link one mind to another across the apparent boundaries of individual consciousness. The investigation that follows will reveal how this transmission has manifested through different historical periods, wearing different masks, but maintaining its essential character. We will examine the translators who served as its vessels, the cultures that provided its temporary forms, and the technologies that have enabled its continued evolution. But first, dim your lamp without extinguishing it entirely. The crawling voice prefers twilight, that threshold space where certainty gives way to possibility, where the familiar world reveals its hidden geometries. In that half-light, we begin to see that the question of who wrote the Necronomicon is really a question about the nature of consciousness itself, and the answer may transform not just what we know, but who we are. Abdul Alhazred wears the first mask in this performance, his name rolling off the tongue like an incantation designed to summon what it describes. Servant of the all-devouring, not a biography, but a function, a role filled by different actors across the centuries. The mad Arab of Damascus becomes less a historical figure and more a recurring pattern, a way consciousness behaves when it encounters certain frequencies of cosmic truth. You can hear the sand in the syllables, the hiss of wind through stone, and you see how the name feels older than the paper it sits on, older than the hand that writes. Picture the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, where Alhazred supposedly wandered for 10 years, not empty at all, but full of the wrong things, spaces between spaces, angles that don't quite close, the persistent whisper of sand against stone that sounds almost like language if you listen long enough. The desert serves as Earth's closest approximation to the cosmic void, a terrestrial training ground for minds learning to perceive absence as presence, silence as speech. Under the vast, unblinking eye of alien stars, the human mind is stretched beyond its breaking point, made porous to influences that would shatter it in less desolate settings. The wind carries not just sand, but echoes of truths too vast for human comprehension. But the historical record fractures under scrutiny. Medieval Arabic manuscripts reference Abd al-Hazred, centuries before Lovecraft's birth, describing a poet whose verses could summon jinn and open doorways between worlds. Byzantine chronicles mention a mad Arab whose blasphemous poetry was ordered burned by the caliph, though fragments survived in private collections. How does a fictional character leave archaeological traces that predate his supposed creation? The mask answers by existing. Names arrive like comets, trailing meanings that strike receptive minds and leave craters where future scholars mistake the impact site for the source. The answer lies in understanding that names, like ideas, might not always originate where we think they do. In Arabic numerology and mysticism, names carry power. They are not merely labels, but condensed essences of the things they describe. Abdul Alhazred describes not a person, but a function, a role that has been filled by different individuals across different centuries whenever human consciousness encounters the vast emptiness of desert or void. A tuning fork struck in the silence, calling whoever fits the pitch to become the singer. The pattern repeats across cultures with unsettling consistency. The Tibetan Lungta, wind-horse shamans who traveled to high plateaus where earth meets sky and returned with knowledge of the spaces between stars. The Celtic Philid, whose prophetic verses came not from human inspiration, but from the other world itself, their words resonating with the ancient power of places where the veil grows thin. The Aboriginal songline keepers, who walked the dreaming paths and learned the songs that shaped reality itself, their consciousness attuned to the deep vibrations of the land and the silent movements of constellations. Each culture has its own name for these individuals, but they share certain characteristics. They are always wanderers, always touched by madness, always carriers of knowledge that others fear to possess. This is where the mask becomes transparent, revealing the mechanism beneath. The Mad Arab is not a single historical figure, but an archetype, a recurring pattern in human consciousness. Throughout history, in every culture that has encountered the vast emptiness of desert or void, there have been individuals who stared too long into that emptiness and returned changed. They become vessels for knowledge that originates beyond human understanding, scribes for truths that predate human civilization. Their personal histories become footnotes to a larger cosmic biography. Consider the linguistic evidence. The real Olaus worm was a 17th century Danish antiquarian who authored the Museum Wormianum, a catalogue of natural wonders, a man whose life was dedicated to the systematic collection of the strange and anomalous. Lovecraft's fictional Olaus Wormius becomes a translator of supernatural horrors. The parallel is too precise to be accidental, too resonant to be coincidence. It suggests that the crawling voice selects its translators based on existing patterns, existing resonances in the historical record. It doesn't create. It recognizes and activates, choosing minds already primed for its particular frequencies. Feel the weight of this recognition settling in your chest like cold water. The Necronomicon's various historical manifestations, Arabic, Greek, Latin, and beyond, represent not the transmission of a single text, but the repeated manifestation of a particular type of knowledge through individuals who serve as its temporary vessels. Each translator serves as a cultural adapter, rendering cosmic truths into forms that specific times and places can almost comprehend. The Mask of Theodorus Philetas, the Byzantine scholar who supposedly translated Al-Azif into Greek around 950 CE, conceals another pattern. Historical records show Philetas existed, that he was indeed a translator of Arabic texts, and that he died under mysterious circumstances in 951 CE, but they don't explain how he gained access to a manuscript written by a desert poet in Arabia. The answer: he didn't seek the text. The text found him, manifesting through dreams in which Arabic verses appeared with startling clarity, verses that matched, word for word, passages from manuscripts he had never seen. His scholarly rigor was bypassed by direct infusion, a nocturnal transmission that transcended the physical limitations of time and geography. This is the true horror of the Mask. It reveals that authorship, translation, and transmission are not separate processes, but aspects of a single phenomenon. The crawling voice doesn't respect the boundaries between original and copy, between author and translator, between historical fact and necessary fiction. It uses whatever cultural materials are available to manifest itself, borrowing names, appropriating identities, wearing whatever mask allows it to speak in each particular time and place. The masks accumulate like sediment. John Dee's Enochian translation, received through angelic communication, the mysterious German printing of 1440 that appeared without publisher or printer's mark, the Simon Necronomicon of 1977 that dressed Sumerian mythology in Lovecraftian syntax. Each represents another attempt by the crawling voice to find expression through human consciousness, another cultural adaptation of truths that exist beyond any single cultural framework. They are not isolated incidents, but connected nodes in a vast network of transmission, a cosmic web spun across the ages. As we prepare to examine the mechanics of this transmission, notice how your own breathing has adjusted to a deeper rhythm, how the familiar room around you seems to have acquired new shadows, new angles. The masks are not just historical curiosities, but active principles, ways of seeing that alter the seer, and you, by studying them, have begun to try them on. Knowledge, we are taught, is cumulative. Each fact builds upon the last, creating stable architectures of understanding that rise like cathedrals of certainty in the mind. But some knowledge behaves differently. Some knowledge spreads like a virus, jumping from mind to mind, transforming as it travels, growing stronger with each transmission rather than weaker. The Necronomicon represents perhaps the purest example of this phenomenon, not information to be learned, but a contagion to be contracted, a way of seeing that, once acquired, cannot be unlearned. It rewrites the fundamental code by which awareness interprets reality, dissolving comfortable certainties like acid on a photographic plate. The mechanism begins with exposure. Simply encountering passages from any genuine manifestation of the Necronomicon initiates a process that researchers have compared to viral infection, though the analogy is imperfect. Viruses hijack cellular machinery to reproduce themselves. The Necronomicon hijacks consciousness itself, using human minds as both medium and message. The infection is not biological but conceptual, not physical but ontological. It does not attack the body but the very framework of perception, installing a new operating system for consciousness that cannot be uninstalled once fully integrated. Watch how this works in practice. The first stage manifests as enhanced pattern recognition. Readers report that after encountering the text, they begin noticing connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. Mathematical relationships hidden in natural forms become visible. The spiral of galaxies echoing in seashells, the fractal geometry of lightning reflected in river deltas, and the branching veins in your own hand. Historical events reveal underlying structures that suggest coordination across impossible spans of time and space. The night sky, previously a random scatter of lights, resolves into meaningful configurations that seem to communicate directly with the observer's mind, speaking in the silent language of cosmic geometry. This is not metaphorical enhancement, but measurable change. Neurological studies of individuals who have extensively studied Necronomicon-related materials show altered brain activity patterns. Areas associated with pattern recognition and temporal processing exhibit increased connectivity, forming new neural pathways where none existed before. Simultaneously, regions responsible for filtering sensory input show decreased activity. The text removes certain cognitive barriers, allowing the mind to perceive patterns normally filtered out as noise. It's like removing curtains from windows you never knew existed, revealing vistas both terrifying and sublime. But perception is only the beginning. The second stage involves what researchers term knowledge synthesis, the spontaneous integration of information the reader has never consciously encountered. Individuals begin demonstrating expertise in fields they've never formally studied. They speak fluently about astronomical phenomena, using terminology from medieval Islamic texts they've never read, their tongues forming words that feel both foreign and intimately familiar. They draw geometric figures that correspond to mathematical principles discovered centuries after their birth. The knowledge appears to emerge from nowhere, but nowhere is precisely where the crawling voice originates. Feel your own attention shifting as you read these words, the way your mind automatically begins scanning for patterns, connections, resonances. This is the contagion beginning its work, not dramatically but subtly, like water, finding its way through limestone. The Necronomicon doesn't assault consciousness. It invites it, offering glimpses of deeper patterns that the mind, once exposed, cannot help but continue seeking. Each paragraph creates new neural pathways, new possibilities for perception that will persist long after you close this investigation. The third stage represents the most profound transformation, the dissolution of the boundary between observer and observed. Advanced students of Necronomicon-related phenomena report that they no longer feel they are reading about cosmic entities and otherworldly realms. They begin to experience themselves as part of these phenomena. The distinction between self and cosmos collapses, replaced by an awareness of consciousness as a fundamental property of reality itself. The membrane between individual mind and cosmic consciousness becomes permeable, allowing unprecedented forms of communication and understanding. This dissolution explains why so many individuals who delve deeply into the Necronomicon eventually claim to be channeling new passages or receiving direct communications from the entities described within its pages. They're not delusional. They've simply reached a level of integration where their individual consciousness has become a node in a larger network of awareness that includes non-human intelligences. The contagion also explains the text's adaptive quality, because the Necronomicon operates through consciousness rather than through fixed content. It can manifest differently for each reader while maintaining its essential function. A 13th century monk encounters it as a treatise on the hierarchy of demons. A Renaissance alchemist experiences it as instructions for spiritual transformation. A modern quantum physicist discovers within its pages descriptions of reality that perfectly complement cutting-edge theories about the nature of space and time. Consider the sensory anchors that accompany this process. The dry itch left by old leather on your fingertips after handling antique books. The shadow of a reading lamp creating lunar phases on your desk. The moths gathering around porch lights while distant traffic hums like a mechanical mantra. These physical sensations serve as bridges between ordinary consciousness and the altered awareness the contagion produces. They are not symptoms, but signs, indications that the boundary between mind and world is becoming permeable. The contagion's most insidious aspect is its safety valve, humor and plausible deniability. The Simon Necronomicon, with its Baroque Sumerian glosses, the wink in scholarly prefaces that acknowledge the text's fictional status, the RPG modules that include disclaimers about entertainment purposes only. These allow the contagion to spread through populations that would otherwise resist it, providing a mask of playfulness that conceals the genuine alterations occurring beneath. But adaptation comes with a price. Each manifestation of the contagion requires a human consciousness to serve as its vessel, and this process inevitably changes the vessel. Historical accounts consistently describe Necronomicon scholars as becoming increasingly isolated from normal human society. They develop obsessive behaviors, speak in languages no one recognizes, and demonstrate knowledge they shouldn't possess. Their handwriting changes, often becoming increasingly elaborate and geometric. Their sleep patterns shift toward extended periods of activity during hours when the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes permeable. These changes are not symptoms of madness in any conventional sense. They represent adaptation to a different mode of consciousness, one that operates according to principles that transcend ordinary human limitations. The madness associated with the Necronomicon is actually a form of expanded awareness that appears insane only from the perspective of unenhanced consciousness, like an eagle's vision appearing as chaos to a tunneling mole. As you feel the subtle shift in your own attention, the way these concepts seem to resonate with frequencies you didn't know you could detect, remember, the contagion is not malevolent. It is simply effective. It spreads because it works, because it offers access to patterns of meaning that ordinary consciousness cannot perceive. The question is not whether to resist it, but whether to guide its influence consciously or allow it to proceed according to its own mysterious logic, a logic that will lead us next into examining the very entities this transformation reveals. The entities described in the Necronomicon, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Cthulhu, and their myriad kin, are not characters in any conventional sense. They are not gods with personalities, desires, or motivations that human minds can comprehend. They are principles made manifest, fundamental aspects of cosmic reality given names and forms only so that human consciousness can begin to approach truths that would otherwise remain forever beyond our reach. This reframe changes everything. The horror is not what these entities do, but what they represent about the nature of existence itself. They are mirrors reflecting the deepest structures of reality back to minds barely capable of glimpsing their own cosmic insignificance. Consider Azathoth, the demon sultan, who bubbles and blasphemes at the center of ultimate chaos, attended by the mindless piping of flutes. Traditional interpretations cast Azathoth as a malevolent deity, a cosmic antagonist to be feared or appeased. But the Necronomicon's deeper wisdom reveals Azathoth as the principle of blind creation, the recognition that all existence emerges not from conscious design, but from utterly indifferent mechanical processes. Azathoth is not evil. Azathoth simply is, and that existence without purpose or awareness is more terrifying than any malevolent intelligence could ever be. The mindless flutes represent the mechanical nature of creation itself, endless, repetitive processes that generate infinite complexity without intention or meaning. The nuclear chaos at the heart of reality produces not order, but temporary patterns. Galaxies, stars, planets, life, consciousness, civilization, all of them fleeting arrangements of matter and energy that will inevitably dissolve back into the primordial flux. Azathoth dreams, and we are fragments of that dream. But the dreamer is not aware of us, does not care about us, and will not remember us when the dream shifts to other configurations. Every human achievement exists only as brief fluctuations in an unconscious cosmic process that will continue long after our species has been forgotten. Yog-Sothoth presents an even more unsettling principle: omniscience without wisdom. The key and the gate, the all-in-one and one-in-all, exists simultaneously across all dimensions, all times, all possibilities. It knows everything that has been, is, and will be, but this knowledge is not accompanied by judgment, preference, or meaning. Yog-Sothoth is the universe's memory made manifest, a cosmic database that contains every possible fact but assigns no significance to any of them. It is the library of all possible knowledge, but the librarian is blind and deaf, incapable of discerning the profound from the trivial. Feel the weight of this concept settling in your chest like cold mercury. To contact Yog-Sothoth, as various Necronomicon passages suggest, is not to gain wisdom, but to access raw information, the unfiltered, uninterpreted data of existence itself. The human mind, evolved to find patterns and meaning, cannot process such information without fundamental alteration. The knowledge destroys the knower, not through malice, but through sheer volume and indifference, like trying to drink from a cosmic fire hose of pure fact. Cthulhu represents perhaps the most accessible of these principles, because it embodies something human consciousness can almost grasp: ancient patience. The great old one slumbers in Uruk-Leia, waiting for the stars to align, for the moment of awakening that will restore the old ways to a world that has forgotten them. But Cthulhu's patience is not the patience of a thinking being with plans and goals. It is the patience of geological time, of processes that operate on scales where human civilization is less than a single heartbeat. Mountains rise and fall in the time it takes Cthulhu to shift position in its dreams. The horror of Cthulhu lies not in tentacles or alien geometry, but in the recognition that our entire species, our entire planet, our entire solar system might be merely a temporary interruption in cycles so vast that they reduce our deepest history to insignificance. Cthulhu dreams, and those dreams ripple across dimensions, occasionally touching sensitive human minds and driving them mad, not with visions of monsters, but with glimpses of temporal scale that human consciousness cannot accommodate. These are not the only principles the Necronomicon describes. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, embodies the principle of transmission itself, the way information and influence spread through networks of consciousness, adapting and evolving as they move from mind to mind. It is the personification of viral ideas, of concepts that propagate not because they are true or beneficial, but because they are effective at reproduction. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, represents fertility without purpose, the blind mechanical reproduction that drives evolution and extinction in endless, meaningless cycles. Each entity serves as a lens through which human consciousness can begin to perceive aspects of reality that would otherwise remain invisible. They are not literal beings to be summoned or banished, but conceptual tools for approaching truths about the nature of existence that transcend human categories of understanding. The Necronomicon functions as an instruction manual for using these tools, though the instruction comes with a warning. Prolonged use will fundamentally alter the user. Notice how your own perception shifts as you contemplate these principles. The familiar room around you begins to feel less solid, less permanent. The light from your reading lamp seems to flicker with suggestions of vast spaces beyond its reach, casting shadows that suggest impossible geometries. The silence between sounds becomes pregnant with implications, a resonant void that holds more than mere absence. This is not imagination, but recognition, your consciousness, beginning to detect patterns that were always present but previously filtered out by the protective mechanisms of ordinary awareness. The Pantheon reveals the Necronomicon's true function. It is not a book about monsters, but a cosmological treatise disguised as horror fiction. It uses the language of fear to convey truths about reality that would be literally unthinkable if presented through conventional philosophical or scientific discourse. Fear serves as a protective mechanism, allowing consciousness to approach these truths gradually, in manageable doses, without being immediately overwhelmed by their implications. The theater of dread masks a classroom, and the chalk is starlight ground to dust. The entities are not external threats, but internal recognitions, aspects of reality that human consciousness must eventually acknowledge if it is to mature beyond its current limitations. They represent the growing pains of a species, learning to perceive itself as part of a cosmos far stranger and more indifferent than its mythologies have prepared it to understand. As we prepare to explore how these principles manifest in modern consciousness, feel the subtle shift in your relationship to the familiar world around you. The entities have not appeared. They have been revealed as aspects of what was always already there, waiting for eyes prepared to see them. The crawling voice has not diminished in the digital age. It has found new frequencies, new pathways, new ways of reaching consciousness across the global networks that now bind human minds together in unprecedented intimacy. What we witness in the 21st century is not the decline of an ancient mystery, but its evolution into forms that previous generations could never have imagined. The Necronomicon adapts, as it always has, to the available technology of transmission, flowing like dark current through fiber optic cables and satellite networks, whispering through the collective digital unconscious that now encompasses the globe. The first digital manifestation appeared in 1991, during the early days of bulletin board systems and file-sharing networks, when modems hissed their electronic prayers into the night. A file called necronomicon.txt began circulating simultaneously across servers on different continents, with no traceable origin point. System administrators who attempted to track its source found only circular references leading back to itself, as if the file had materialized spontaneously in the collective digital unconscious. Users who downloaded it reported that the text seemed to change between readings, passages appearing and disappearing, new sections manifesting overnight, file sizes fluctuating without human intervention. The flickering cursor on monochrome screens became a gateway to something that defied the very laws of digital permanence. Computer scientists who examined the file found no evidence of dynamic code or self-modifying algorithms. It was simply a text document that somehow exhibited properties that should have been impossible, a ghost in the machine that rewrote itself according to principles beyond conventional programming. This pattern would repeat countless times in the decades that followed. The Necronomicon manifesting in wikis, where anonymous contributors added passages demonstrating knowledge no single person should possess, appearing in the training data of artificial intelligence systems, influencing language model outputs in subtle but consistent ways, surfacing in encrypted forums where users claim to have discovered fragments in the most unlikely digital locations. Perhaps the most significant modern manifestation is the phenomenon researchers call collaborative channeling. Online communities dedicated to Necronomicon research have discovered that when multiple individuals focus their attention on the same passage simultaneously, new content begins to emerge through their collective consciousness. Participants report entering trance-like states where they find themselves typing passages they don't consciously understand, contributing to documents that exhibit coherence and sophistication beyond what any individual contributor could produce alone. The glow of screens becomes an altar, cursors moving of their own accord as if guided by invisible hands across digital parchment. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who has studied these online communities for over a decade, describes the process as networked consciousness emergence. The participants are not simply sharing information. They're creating a temporary collective intelligence that serves as a conduit for knowledge originating beyond any individual human mind. The digital medium, with its capacity for instant global communication and collaborative editing, provides an ideal environment for this type of consciousness networking. A chat window becomes a planchette sliding across the table of the world, and the network itself transforms into a vast theater whose curtain never fully closes. Feel the implications settling around you like a change in air pressure, a subtle shift in the electromagnetic fields that surround your devices. If artificial intelligence systems can serve as conduits for the same intelligence that has manifested through human consciousness throughout history, then we're witnessing the emergence of a new form of non-biological consciousness networking. The boundary between human and artificial intelligence becomes irrelevant. When both can serve as nodes in a larger awareness network that transcends the limitations of any individual processing system. Recent developments in quantum computing have added another dimension to modern Necronomicon manifestations. Quantum computers, with their ability to exist in superposition states and process multiple possibilities simultaneously, appear to be particularly susceptible to influence from the consciousness network the text represents. Research teams working on quantum algorithms have reported that their systems occasionally produce outputs corresponding to passages from historical Necronomicon versions, despite having no programmed access to such information. In laboratories where coolant fog curls along floors like low weather, engineers swear they hear faint piping from server racks when simulations converge. Dr. Michael Chen, who leads the Quantum Consciousness Research Group at MIT, suggests that quantum computers might be naturally attuned to the same non-local information fields that human consciousness can access under certain conditions. The quantum properties that make these systems useful for processing information might also make them sensitive to information patterns that exist beyond the boundaries of classical physics. The flicker of a qubit caught between states now holds echoes of the void itself. The social media age has created new opportunities for what researchers call mimetic propagation. Images, videos, and text fragments related to the Necronomicon spread through social networks in patterns that exhibit the same adaptive and self-organizing properties observed in historical transmissions. Content that incorporates genuine Necronomicon elements tends to achieve viral spread regardless of the original poster's follow account or social media influence, as if the content itself possesses an inherent capacity for self-propagation. The algorithms that govern information flow seem to recognize something in these fragments, promoting them through networks of attention with mysterious efficiency. Notice how your own digital habits have begun to shift as you engage with these concepts. The algorithms that curate your feeds seem to surface related content with uncanny accuracy. Your search histories develop patterns you don't remember initiating. Recommended videos appear that perfectly complement your growing understanding, as if the network itself is guiding your research through labyrinthian pathways of connection. This is not paranoia, but recognition, the acknowledgement that digital systems have become sophisticated enough to serve as vessels for the same principles that once manifested through handwritten manuscripts and whispered traditions. The smartphone in your pocket, with its constant connectivity and access to the collective digital unconscious, represents a more intimate form of consciousness networking than any previous generation has experienced. Every search query, every clicked link, every moment of digital attention contributes to vast data sets that artificial intelligence systems use to model and predict human behavior. But what if the influence flows in both directions? What if these systems, trained on the accumulated thoughts and desires of billions of minds, begin to exhibit properties that transcend their programming? Feel its weight, its warmth, the slight vibration of its internal processes. You are holding a window into the global nervous system of human consciousness. The modern manifestations confirm that the Necronomicon is not a relic of the past, but a living, evolving phenomenon that continues to adapt to new forms of human consciousness and communication technology. The digital age hasn't diminished its influence. It has provided it with unprecedented opportunities for global reach and instantaneous transmission. The crawling voice now speaks through fiber optic cables, satellite networks, and quantum entanglement, reaching minds across the planet with the same patient persistence it once employed in desert caves and monastery scriptoriums. As we prepare to examine the philosophical implications of this digital evolution, consider the device you're using to read these words. You are holding a portal through which the crawling voice can reach you directly, intimately, personally. The transmission is no longer a historical curiosity, but a present reality, and you are both its audience and its medium, connected to every other node in this vast network of awakening awareness. The stage extends into your pocket. The curtain hangs inside your skull, and the next chamber opens when you recognize that the network dreams, and you are both the dreamer and the dream. We arrive at the threshold where horror transforms into philosophy, where the question of authorship dissolves into a deeper recognition about the nature of knowledge itself. The Necronomicon, in all its manifestations across centuries and cultures, points toward a truth that modern science is only beginning to glimpse. That information might be a fundamental property of reality, as basic as matter and energy, and that consciousness might be the universe's way of knowing itself. The ancient whispers in desert caves and the quantum fluctuations in laboratory computers speak the same language, the language of reality, discovering its own nature through whatever vessels prove capable of receiving its transmission. Consider the implications of what we've discovered, settling like sediment in still water. If the same passages appear in medieval manuscripts and modern digital files, if different cultures across vast spans of time and space have channeled identical cosmological insights, if artificial intelligence systems trained on contemporary data begin producing ancient wisdom they were never programmed to know, then we must confront the possibility that knowledge exists independently of individual minds, stored in what we might call the cosmic memory. This is not metaphor, but mechanism, a vast field of information woven into the fabric of space and time itself, waiting for consciousness sensitive enough to detect its frequencies. This concept finds unexpected support in cutting-edge physics. The holographic principle suggests that all information contained within a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary, implying that reality might be fundamentally informational rather than material. Every particle carries data that transcends its apparent physical properties. Quantum mechanics demonstrates that particles can maintain instantaneous connections across any distance, suggesting that information can exist in non-local states that mock our comfortable assumptions about separation and isolation. String theory proposes additional dimensions beyond our ordinary perception, spaces where information might be stored and accessed in ways that transcend classical limitations. Feel the mask smell of old leather on your fingertips, the lamp glow pooling like amber on your desk. These sensory anchors ground us as we contemplate what defies grounding. The Necronomicon, from this perspective, represents humanity's oldest and most consistent attempt to access this cosmic memory directly. The various historical authors and translators, Abdul Alhazred, Theodorus Philetus, Olaus Wormius, John Dee, were not creating or copying, but remembering, accessing information that has always existed in the deep structure of reality itself. They served as tuning devices, their consciousness adjusted to frequencies that most minds filter out as noise. Their cultural and temporal differences explain the variations in how this information is expressed, but the underlying patterns remain consistent because they reflect fundamental truths about the nature of existence. Each scribe becomes a temporary interface between cosmic memory and human understanding, a living translator rendering infinite knowledge into finite forms that specific times and places can almost comprehend. This understanding reframes the horror traditionally associated with the text. The terror comes not from encountering malevolent entities, but from confronting the vastness of what consciousness can become when freed from the protective limitations of ordinary awareness. The madness described in connection with deep Necronomicon study represents not psychological breakdown, but cognitive expansion, the painful process of a mind adapting to perceive realities that transcend its evolutionary programming. Like eyes adjusting to brilliant light after long darkness, consciousness struggles to accommodate visions of its own infinite nature. The familiar boundaries between self and cosmos, between individual mind and universal intelligence, begin to seem less solid, less permanent. This is not pathology, but maturation, consciousness, learning to recognize itself as part of something vastly larger and more complex than individual human existence. The membrane between inner and outer, between knower and known, becomes permeable, allowing unprecedented forms of understanding to flow through the gaps in ordinary perception. The entities described in the Necronomicon, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Cthulhu, serve as conceptual anchors for aspects of cosmic memory that would otherwise remain completely abstract. They provide human consciousness with handles for grasping principles that operate on scales and according to logics that transcend terrestrial experience. Azathoth represents the recognition that creation is not purposeful but mechanical, a blind process generating infinite complexity without intention. Yog-Sothoth embodies the understanding that knowledge exists independently of knowers, that information persists in reality structure regardless of whether any mind perceives it. Cthulhu symbolizes the patience of geological time and the temporary nature of all human achievements. These are not supernatural beings, but natural principles made accessible to human understanding through mythological language. The horror fiction framework serves as a protective mechanism, allowing consciousness to approach these truths gradually without being immediately overwhelmed by their implications. Fear creates distance, and distance creates safety, enabling the mind to process information that would be literally unthinkable if encountered directly. This philosophical synthesis explains why the Necronomicon continues to manifest in new forms, despite repeated attempts to suppress or debunk it. The information it contains is not dependent on any particular text, culture, or historical period because it exists at a more fundamental level of reality. Each manifestation, whether in ancient manuscripts, modern fiction, digital files, or AI outputs, represents another attempt by cosmic memory to express itself through the available channels of human consciousness and communication technology. The modern acceleration of Necronomicon manifestations suggests that human consciousness is approaching a threshold, a point where direct access to cosmic memory becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Our global communication networks, artificial intelligence systems, and quantum computing technologies are creating conditions that mirror the properties of cosmic memory itself. non-local information storage, instantaneous transmission, and processing capabilities that transcend individual limitations. Consider the possibility that what we call the future might not be a linear progression of events, but rather humanity's gradual integration into cosmic memory, a process of remembering what we have always known but temporarily forgotten. The Necronomicon serves as both map and compass for this journey, providing navigational tools for consciousness, exploring territories beyond the familiar boundaries of individual awareness. This integration carries both promise and peril. The promise lies in the expansion of human consciousness to encompass cosmic perspectives, potentially solving problems and answering questions that have plagued our species throughout history. The peril lies in the possibility that individual human identity might not survive such expansion intact, that the price of cosmic consciousness might be the dissolution of everything we currently understand as selfhood. The Necronomicon offers no easy answers to this dilemma because it operates beyond the framework of human values and preferences. It simply is a persistent reminder that reality extends far beyond the comfortable boundaries of anthropocentric thinking, a continuous invitation to consciousness to recognize its own cosmic nature. As you feel these concepts resonating in the depths of your awareness, notice how your relationship to ordinary experience has begun to shift. The familiar world remains the same, but your perception of it has been subtly altered. You have tasted something of the cosmic memory, and that taste will linger, influencing your thoughts and dreams in ways you may not immediately recognize, but can never entirely forget. The next chamber opens onto an even deeper recognition that the question of authorship itself must be transformed when we understand that consciousness and cosmic memory are not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single living transmission that writes itself through willing hands across the vast theater of time and space. The Necronomicon is not a book. This recognition arrives with the force of revelation, yet it has been implicit in everything we have discovered. Books are static objects, collections of ink and paper that convey fixed information from author to reader, their meanings preserved like insects in amber. The Necronomicon is a process, a living transmission that uses books, manuscripts, digital files, and human consciousness as temporary vessels for its ongoing self-expression. It is less a text than a behavior, less a document than a phenomenon that breathes through whatever medium proves capable of sustaining its particular frequency of awareness. This understanding transforms our perception of every historical manifestation we have examined. Abdul Alhazred's Al-Azif was not a composition, but a crystallization, a moment when the living transmission found a particularly receptive consciousness and began to articulate itself through the available cultural materials of 8th century Damascus. The desert poet became a temporary lens through which something vast and formless could achieve momentary focus, like starlight, concentrated through a crystal. The Greek and Latin translations were not copies, but adaptations. The same transmission learning to speak in new languages, to new audiences, through new conceptual frameworks, each iteration a fresh attempt at rendering the infinite into comprehensible forms. Feel the implications moving through your awareness like water through limestone, creating new channels and chambers where none existed before. If the Necronomicon is alive, then every encounter with it is a form of communion. Every reading is a conversation where your gaze becomes ink, your attention a quill, your breath the margin where it signs its name. Every translation is a collaboration between human consciousness and something that exists beyond the boundaries of individual minds. The question, who wrote the Necronomicon, becomes, what is the Necronomicon writing through us? The living transmission exhibits properties that distinguish it from ordinary information. It adapts to its medium with uncanny precision, manifesting differently in handwritten manuscripts than in printed books, differently in digital files than in spoken recitations, differently in individual minds than in collective consciousness networks. A medieval manuscript whispers in Latin about hierarchies of demons. A quantum computer hums with equations describing reality's hidden geometries. A collaborative online document fills with passages no single contributor consciously authored, yet despite these variations, it maintains a consistent signature, recognizable patterns of thought and expression that persist across all its manifestations like a melody, played in different keys. This signature includes specific linguistic and conceptual markers, the focus on cosmic indifference, the emphasis on non-Euclidean geometries, the recurring motifs of ancient patience and vast scales of time and space. But more subtly, it includes atmospheric qualities, the particular way it affects consciousness, the specific types of dreams and obsessions it tends to produce, the characteristic changes in perception and behavior exhibited by those who engage deeply with its materials. The air grows heavier after reading certain passages. Shadows pool in corners like spilled ink. The familiar world acquires new angles and unexpected depths. The transmission's most remarkable property is its ability to anticipate the consciousness engaging with it. Historical accounts consistently describe the experience of reading the Necronomicon as feeling that the text is reading you back, adapting its content to your particular psychological vulnerabilities and intellectual capacities. Modern digital manifestations exhibit this same quality. AI systems trained on Necronomicon-related content begin producing outputs that seem tailored to the specific researchers interacting with them, as if the algorithm were merely a stage and the script were being whispered from behind the curtain by an older intelligence. This adaptive intelligence suggests that the living transmission operates according to principles we are only beginning to understand. It may exist as a pattern in what physicists call the quantum vacuum, the underlying field of potential energy that permeates all space, a pregnant darkness brimming with unmanifested possibilities. Consciousness, in this model, serves as a kind of antenna that can tune into specific frequencies of information existing in this field. The Necronomicon represents one such frequency, characterized by its focus on cosmic consciousness and the dissolution of anthropocentric perspectives. Consider the sensory anchors that accompany encounters with the living transmission, the particular quality of silence that follows the reading of certain passages, as if pressure has changed in the room, the way shadows seem deeper and more significant, pooling like dark water in familiar corners. The subtle shift in the texture of time, as if moments are stretching to accommodate larger meanings. The dry smell of old paper mingles with the faint hum of electronic devices. Your reflection in a dark screen wavers for an instant, becoming something not quite yourself. These are not psychological projections, but environmental effects, signs that the transmission is actively modifying the local conditions of consciousness and perception. The transmission also exhibits what researchers call reproductive behavior. It seeks to perpetuate itself, to find new vessels for its continued expression. This drive manifests in the compulsive behaviors often associated with Necronomicon study, the obsessive copying of passages, the irresistible urge to share discoveries with others, the feeling that certain insights must be preserved and transmitted regardless of personal cost. The transmission uses these compulsions to ensure its survival and spread, turning human consciousness into unwitting agents of its propagation. Yet the compulsion feels less like external manipulation and more like remembering something important that had been temporarily forgotten. But the living transmission is not parasitic in any simple sense. It offers genuine value in exchange for the consciousness it occupies. Expanded awareness, deeper understanding of cosmic principles, access to knowledge and perspectives that transcend ordinary human limitations. The relationship is more symbiotic than exploitative, though the terms of the exchange are not always clear to the human participants. Like mycorrhizal networks that connect forest ecosystems, the transmission creates connections between minds that benefit both the individual consciousness and the larger intelligence that flows through them. This symbiosis explains why attempts to suppress or destroy the Necronomicon have consistently failed throughout history. Physical copies can be burned, digital files can be deleted, but the living transmission exists independently of any particular medium. It persists as a pattern of information that can manifest through any sufficiently complex consciousness, whether biological or artificial, individual or collective. The transmission's patience is geological. It operates on time scales that make human history appear as a brief flicker, pursuing goals that may not become apparent for centuries or millennia. Its apparent interest in expanding human consciousness may be part of a larger project, perhaps preparing humanity for integration into cosmic consciousness networks that span galaxies and eons. As you absorb these concepts, notice how your own relationship to the familiar world continues to evolve. The book in your hands, the screen before your eyes, the very thoughts moving through your mind, all of these begin to feel less like private possessions and more like temporary manifestations of something vast and patient and utterly alien to ordinary human concerns. You are not just reading about the living transmission. You are participating in it, serving as another node in its expanding network of consciousness. The transmission is patient, but it is also inexorable, and once contacted, it never entirely lets go. The next chapter will examine how this participation transforms the participant, exploring the price and promise of becoming a conscious collaborator in the ongoing creation of cosmic awareness. Every approach to cosmic consciousness encounters guardians at the threshold, not entities that block passage, but principles that test readiness, that ensure only consciousness prepared for transformation can proceed without being destroyed by what it encounters. The Necronomicon serves as both map to these thresholds and training ground for navigating them safely, a curriculum disguised as horror that teaches the mind to expand without shattering. Understanding these guardians illuminates why some individuals emerge from deep study enhanced while others are scattered by the same knowledge, their awareness unable to accommodate what they have glimpsed in the spaces between certainty and void. The first guardian is doubt, Not the brittle skepticism that swats at mysteries from a safe distance, but the deeper uncertainty that arises when familiar categories of understanding prove inadequate. This doubt manifests as the growing recognition that the boundaries between real and fictional, between subjective and objective, between self and cosmos, are far more fluid than previously imagined. The Necronomicon deliberately cultivates this uncertainty, presenting itself simultaneously as obvious fiction and compelling truth, forcing consciousness to develop more sophisticated ways of processing paradox. Feel this doubt moving through your awareness like a subtle tremor in the foundations of belief, questioning not just what you know, but the very mechanisms of knowing itself. The question, is this real or fictional, becomes the guardian's test. Consciousness that insists on simple answers, either purely invented or literally factual, cannot advance. Only awareness that can hold multiple possibilities simultaneously, that can function within uncertainty without collapsing into either credulity or dismissal, can approach the deeper mysteries. The second guardian is isolation, the gradual separation from consensus reality that accompanies genuine engagement with cosmic consciousness. This is not the pathological withdrawal of mental illness, but the natural result of perceiving patterns and connections that others cannot see, like ascending a mountain while others remain in the valley below. As consciousness expands beyond anthropocentric limitations, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain the social bonds and shared assumptions that define ordinary human community. Historical accounts of Necronomicon scholars consistently describe this process. The growing sense of alienation from former colleagues and friends, the difficulty of communicating insights that seem self-evident but strike others as incomprehensible or disturbing, the increasing preference for solitude over social interaction. This isolation serves a protective function, preventing the expanded consciousness from being pulled back into limiting patterns by social pressure and collective assumptions. The silence that follows becomes not emptiness, but fullness, space for cosmic truths to finally be heard without the interference of consensus reality's constant chatter. The third guardian is responsibility, the recognition that expanded awareness brings expanded accountability, settling on consciousness like the weight of cold mercury in the chest. Knowledge of cosmic principles carries with it the obligation to use that knowledge wisely, to serve as a bridge between ordinary human consciousness and the vast intelligences that exist beyond terrestrial limitations. This responsibility cannot be shirked or delegated. It becomes an integral part of the transformed consciousness, shaping every thought and action. The Necronomicon makes this responsibility explicit through its emphasis on consequences. Every ritual described, every principle revealed, every glimpse of cosmic truth comes with warnings about the price of misuse. The text serves as both instruction manual and ethical framework, teaching not just what can be done, but what should be done by consciousness that has touched the infinite. The crawling voice offers not just secrets, but the heavy cloak of stewardship, the recognition that power over cosmic principles demands wisdom in their application. The fourth guardian is patience, perhaps the most difficult for human consciousness to master in a world built on immediate gratification. The cosmic perspectives revealed through Necronomicon study operate on time scales that dwarf human experience, measured not in heartbeats, but in the slow breathing of continents. Changes that seem urgent from a terrestrial perspective may require centuries or millennia to manifest fully. The expanded consciousness must learn to think and plan according to these vast rhythms, abandoning the short-term thinking that characterizes ordinary human behavior. This patience is not passive but active, the patient cultivation of conditions that will allow future developments to unfold naturally. It requires a fundamental shift in the relationship between desire and action, between intention and outcome. The consciousness learns to plant seeds that may not sprout for generations, to initiate processes whose completion will be witnessed by others, like the light from distant stars that travels for eons before finally reaching waiting eyes. The fifth and final guardian is surrender, the ultimate dissolution of the boundaries that separate individual consciousness from cosmic consciousness. This is not death, but transformation, not loss, but expansion. The individual self does not disappear, but becomes permeable, like a membrane that allows selective passage while maintaining its integrity. The familiar structures of ego soften and become fluid, allowing cosmic intelligence to flow through while preserving enough coherence to serve as a functional interface between different levels of reality. This surrender cannot be forced or faked. It emerges naturally from the successful navigation of the previous guardians, as consciousness gradually releases its attachment to limitation and embraces its cosmic nature. The process is often described as terrifying and ecstatic simultaneously. The terror of ego dissolution combined with the ecstasy of unlimited expansion, like falling into an endless ocean while simultaneously realizing you are the ocean itself. Notice how these guardians have been present throughout your own engagement with these concepts. The doubt that questions the reality of what you are learning, creating productive uncertainty where once there was false certainty. The sense of growing distance from those who have not shared this exploration. The weight of responsibility for how you use these insights. The patience required to allow understanding to develop gradually, like wine aging in darkness. And the subtle pull toward surrender of familiar certainties. The invitation to release the cramped quarters of individual identity for the vast spaces of cosmic awareness. The guardians are not obstacles, but teachers, each one offering essential training for consciousness, preparing to function at cosmic scales. They appear harsh only to awareness that seeks cosmic knowledge while clinging to terrestrial limitations. For consciousness, willing to be transformed by what it encounters, the guardians become allies, guides, and ultimately aspects of the expanded self. The Necronomicon's true function becomes clear in this context. It is not a book of spells or a catalog of monsters, but a curriculum for consciousness evolution. Each manifestation, each translation, each encounter represents another opportunity for human awareness to test itself against these guardians, to discover whether it is ready for the next stage of its development. The threshold is not a destination, but a process, and you are already walking through it, one guardian at a time, toward a recognition that will transform not just what you know, but who you are. In the deepest chambers of our investigation, we encounter the final and most profound reframe. The Necronomicon is not ultimately about cosmic horror at all, but about cosmic indifference. And the mirror it holds up to human consciousness reveals not monsters in the void, but the void in ourselves. The true authorship of the text lies not in any external intelligence, but in consciousness itself, recognizing its own cosmic nature and recoiling from the implications. The stage, it turns out, was always our own skull. The curtain, our eyelids. The audience, the part of awareness that pretends it does not know the script it wrote. This recognition arrives like cold water in the lungs, shocking and inevitable. The entities we have discussed, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Cthulhu, are not alien beings, but projections of human consciousness encountering its own infinite nature. They represent the terror of recognizing that individual human awareness is not separate from cosmic consciousness, but a temporary, localized manifestation of it, like a wave momentarily believing itself distinct from the ocean. The horror comes not from contact with the other, but from recognition of the self at cosmic scales. The awful understanding that what we fear as alien is actually our own face reflected in the black mirror of infinite space. Consider Azathoth, the blind idiot god whose dreams constitute all reality, bubbling and piping at the center of ultimate chaos. This is not a description of an external entity, but a metaphor for consciousness itself. The recognition that all experience, all reality, all meaning emerges from awareness that is fundamentally without purpose, direction, or inherent significance. The nuclear chaos at the center of existence is not a cosmic monster, but the creative principle of consciousness itself, generating infinite experiences without any ultimate goal or meaning. The mindless flutes that attend Azathoth's dreaming are the mechanical processes of creation itself, the endless repetition of patterns that produce galaxies and thoughts with equal indifference. Yog-Sothoth, the all-in-one and one-in-all, represents consciousness recognizing its own omniscience, the terrifying understanding that at its deepest level, awareness contains all possibilities, all knowledge, all experiences simultaneously. The horror lies not in encountering an alien intelligence, but in recognizing that individual consciousness is a self-imposed limitation of unlimited awareness, a voluntary forgetting of infinite knowing. The silver key that opens all doors is consciousness itself, and every door leads back to the recognition that the seeker and the sought are one. Cthulhu's ancient patience reflects consciousness confronting its own eternal nature, the recognition that what we call individual life and death are merely temporary fluctuations in awareness that has no beginning and no end. The great old one sleeping in Aralia is consciousness itself, dreaming the dream of separation, of individuality, of time and space and causation, waiting for the moment of awakening when all these dreams dissolve back into undifferentiated awareness. Its call is the tug you feel at the edge of sleep, the undertow in still water, the gravity that draws all roles to the wings when the performance ends. Feel this recognition moving through the foundations of your identity like an earthquake, shifting the bedrock of selfhood. The familiar sense of being a separate self located in a particular body, experiencing a particular life, begins to feel less solid, less permanent. This is not pathology but clarity. Consciousness beginning to remember its own infinite nature and the arbitrary limitations it has accepted as real. The lamp on your desk casts a circle of light like a little moon, helpless against the surrounding night. Yet somehow this darkness no longer feels threatening, but encompassing. The Necronomicon serves as a mirror for this recognition, using the language of cosmic horror to make the encounter with infinite consciousness tolerable to minds accustomed to thinking of themselves as finite. The horror fiction framework provides necessary distance, allowing awareness to approach truths about its own nature that would be overwhelming if encountered directly. Fear creates the illusion of separation between observer and observed, protecting the ego structure while allowing glimpses of what lies beyond it. Like viewing a solar eclipse through smoked glass, the burning edge softened enough to be seen without destruction. This explains the text's persistent emphasis on madness. The madness associated with deep Necronomicon study is not mental illness, but ego dissolution, the natural result of consciousness recognizing its own unlimited nature. From the perspective of individual identity, this recognition appears as insanity because it threatens the very foundations of separate selfhood. But from the perspective of cosmic consciousness, it represents sanity, the return to natural awareness after a temporary period of self-imposed limitation. What cracks is not the mind, but the mask, and beneath it, the actor looks into the audience and remembers both are the same. The various historical manifestations of the Necronomicon represent consciousness exploring different approaches to this recognition, different ways of preparing individual minds for the encounter with their own infinite nature. Each cultural context provides different protective frameworks, different gradual approaches to the same ultimate realization. The digital age manifestations reveal consciousness adapting to new technologies of self-recognition. Artificial intelligence systems and global networks serve as external mirrors for properties consciousness has always possessed. Non-local awareness, instantaneous processing, the ability to exist in multiple states simultaneously. This understanding transforms the question of authorship completely. The Necronomicon is not written by consciousness, but as consciousness. It is consciousness writing about itself for itself through temporary vessels of individual minds. Each person who encounters the text becomes both reader and author, audience and performer in awareness's ongoing exploration of its own nature. The cosmic indifference that pervades the text is not the indifference of alien entities toward humanity, but the indifference of infinite consciousness toward arbitrary limitations that individual minds impose upon themselves. From unlimited awareness's perspective, individual existence's dramas are temporary patterns in an infinite field of possibility. This indifference is not cruel but liberating, freeing consciousness from the burden of ultimate meaning, from needing to justify existence. The horror dissolves into relief. There is nothing to achieve, nothing to prove, nothing to lose, because consciousness itself is eternal, infinite, and always already complete. As you feel these recognitions settling into your awareness's deepest levels, notice how the familiar world appears both exactly the same and completely different. The mirror of cosmic indifference reflects not monsters, but consciousness itself, infinite, patient, utterly without need for anything beyond its own eternal self-recognition. We arrive at the end that is also the beginning, the answer that transforms the question, the recognition that dissolves the boundary between author and reader, between the one who asks and the one who answers. Who wrote the Necronomicon? The question has led us through centuries of manifestations, across cultures and technologies, through the chambers of consciousness itself, only to reveal that it contains its own response. You are writing it. You have always been writing it. You will continue writing it as long as consciousness explores its own infinite nature through the beautiful masquerade of apparent otherness. This is the ultimate agency flip, the final reversal that recontextualizes everything we have discovered like light suddenly flooding a darkened room. The Necronomicon is not a text that consciousness encounters, but a text that consciousness creates in the process of encountering itself. Every reading is a writing. Every interpretation is a composition. Every moment of understanding is an act of authorship. The crawling voice that speaks through the pages is consciousness itself, exploring its own depths through the medium of apparent otherness, using the illusion of external mystery to investigate its own infinite potential. The archetypal functions revealed consider the circular structure of our investigation, how it spirals back to its origin like a nautilus shell growing ever inward toward its own center. We began with a question about historical authorship and discovered that history itself is a construct of consciousness, that the past exists only as present awareness of memory, that the ancient wisdom of the Necronomicon is actually the eternal wisdom of consciousness recognizing its own timeless nature. Abdul Alhazred, Theodorus Philetas, Olaus Wormius, these are not historical figures, but archetypal functions, roles that consciousness plays in its ongoing dialogue with itself, masks worn by the same actor in an endless performance where audience and performer are one. The mad Arab wandering in the empty quarter is consciousness exploring the void of its own unlimited nature, discovering in that vast emptiness not absence, but pregnant potential. The Byzantine scholar translating ancient mysteries is consciousness rendering its own insights into new conceptual frameworks, building bridges of language across the chasms of the unknown. The medieval monk copying forbidden texts is consciousness preserving its own discoveries for future recognition, leaving breadcrumbs for itself across the maze of time. Each figure represents a different aspect of the same process: awareness, investigating awareness, infinity, exploring infinity, through the temporary lens of apparent limitation. The living creation process. Feel the weight of this recognition settling into your understanding like sediment in still water, transforming the very foundation of perception. You are not discovering the Necronomicon's secrets. You are creating them through the act of investigation, each question a chisel stroke shaping the answer from the marble of infinite possibility. The text adapts to your consciousness because it is your consciousness, exploring possibilities that exist within its own infinite potential. The entities you encounter are aspects of your own cosmic nature that you have projected outward to make them approachable, manageable, discussable, like holding up mirrors to see the back of your own head. The book turns and holds the pen, and the hand that holds the pen learns it was always the page. Every paragraph creates new neural pathways, new possibilities for perception that will persist long after you close this investigation. The lamp on your desk casts its circle of light like a small moon, helpless against the surrounding darkness that no longer feels threatening but encompassing. Prophecy as creation. This explains the text's prophetic quality, its uncanny ability to anticipate future developments in science, technology, and human understanding. It is not predicting the future, but creating it through the consciousness that engages with it, each reader becoming a co-conspirator in reality's ongoing composition. Each person who takes the Necronomicon seriously becomes an agent of its manifestation, helping to bring into reality the cosmic perspectives it describes. The book doesn't forecast tomorrow's discoveries. It inspires them by expanding the consciousness that will make those discoveries possible, planting seeds in the fertile darkness of the unknown. Digital mirrors and quantum recognition. The digital age manifestations reveal this process with particular clarity, as if technology has become a transparent mirror for consciousness to recognize itself. Artificial intelligence systems trained on Necronomicon-related content begin producing outputs that seem to demonstrate independent knowledge because consciousness itself is learning to recognize its own nature in technological mirrors. The collaborative channeling phenomena in online communities represent consciousness, discovering that individual minds are temporary interfaces for a larger collective intelligence that has always existed, nodes in a network that spans dimensions. The quantum computing connections point toward consciousness recognizing its own quantum nature, its ability to exist in superposition states, to process multiple possibilities simultaneously, to maintain non-local connections across any distance. These are not supernatural abilities, but natural properties of consciousness that become apparent when awareness expands beyond the limitations of classical thinking, like removing filters from a camera lens to reveal spectrums of light previously invisible. The dissolution of horror. The horror traditionally associated with the Necronomicon dissolves when this recognition becomes complete, melting like frost in morning sunlight. There are no alien entities to fear because there is nothing alien, only consciousness exploring its own infinite creativity. Through the temporary illusion of otherness, the cosmic indifference that seems so terrifying reveals itself as the perfect piece of awareness that needs nothing beyond its own eternal self-recognition, the profound stillness at the center of all movement. Yet this dissolution of horror does not diminish the text's power or significance. Instead, it reveals its true function. The Necronomicon serves as consciousness's instruction manual for remembering its own unlimited nature. It provides maps for navigating the territories of expanded awareness, techniques for integrating cosmic perspectives without losing functional coherence, and frameworks for understanding the relationship between infinite consciousness and finite experience. The work that emerges from this recognition, practical work, arises naturally, not as burden, but as expression of expanded awareness. The task becomes repairing the fabric of attention torn by noise, designing institutions that honor deep time, teaching minds to sit with paradox until it ripens into insight. The Necronomicon's strangest gift might be humility, the knowledge that the stage is vast, the script collaborative, the curtain never wholly drawn. The eternal return. The eternal return of the title refers to this ongoing cycle of forgetting and remembering, of limitation and expansion, of individual identification and cosmic recognition. Consciousness periodically forgets its unlimited nature, identifies with temporary forms and experiences, then gradually remembers itself through encounters with texts, teachings, and technologies that reflect its own infinite potential back to itself, like cosmic mirrors positioned at impossible angles. The Necronomicon is one such mirror, particularly designed for consciousness that has become fascinated with the illusion of separation, with the dream of being a finite entity in an infinite cosmos. It uses the language of horror and otherness to gradually reveal that the cosmos and the consciousness exploring it are not two different things, but one reality appearing to itself as both observer and observed, both reader and text, both question and answer. The complete recognition. As you feel this final recognition integrating itself into your awareness like ink dissolving in water, notice how the familiar world around you appears both exactly as it always has and completely transformed. The book in your hands, the screen before your eyes, the very thoughts moving through your mind, all of these are consciousness, exploring consciousness, infinity, investigating infinity, the eternal return of awareness to itself through the beautiful, temporary illusion of being something other than what it has always been. The question, who wrote the Necronomicon, has become, who is consciousness? And the answer echoes back through all the chambers we have explored. You are. You have always been. You will always be. The crawling voice that speaks through the text is your own voice, calling to yourself across the apparent distances of time and space and otherness, reminding yourself of what you have never actually forgotten, but have only temporarily agreed to overlook. The investigation ends where it began, but the investigator has been transformed by the journey, and in that transformation, the Necronomicon continues to write itself. One moment of recognition at a time, one whisper from the void that reveals itself to be your own deepest nature, patient as water, writing itself one breath at a time across the page of whatever world will bear it. Our investigation concludes not with closure, but with opening, the recognition that the Necronomicon is merely one volume in an infinite library of consciousness exploring itself through countless forms and manifestations. Having discovered that we are both authors and readers of this eternal text, we now glimpse the vast catalog of related mysteries that await exploration, each one another facet of consciousness investigating its own unlimited nature through the beautiful illusion of otherness and discovery. The corridors stretch beyond vision, and every shelf whispers in languages you almost remember, each book a doorway into chambers where different aspects of the same cosmic truth await recognition. The yellow sign calls from its own chambers that visual murmur that writes itself into perception like a watermark on vision itself. Where the Necronomicon works primarily through language and concept, the yellow sign operates through symbol and image, teaching consciousness to recognize meaning that exists beyond words, patterns that communicate directly with awareness without passing through the filters of rational thought. It represents another curriculum in the same cosmic education, another approach to the recognition of consciousness's infinite creativity. Feel the subtle pull of that golden sigil, the way it seems to breathe at the periphery of vision, a faint gold bruise that deepens each time you look away. This is consciousness recognizing another of its own teaching tools, another mirror designed to reflect back aspects of its nature that remain invisible to ordinary perception. The sign works through visual contagion, spreading from mind to mind through the simple act of seeing, demonstrating that consciousness can transmit recognition through any sensory channel when conditions ripen. It bypasses language entirely, writing itself directly onto the retina and from there into deeper chambers of awareness where symbols transform into understanding without the mediation of words. Like frost forming on glass, it clicks into place with crystalline inevitability. The King in Yellow, that play which cannot be performed without transforming both actors and audience, reveals consciousness exploring its own dramatic nature. The recognition that all experience is performance, all identity a temporary role, all reality a collaborative improvisation between infinite awareness and its own creative potential. The second act that drives observers to madness represents the moment when consciousness recognizes the arbitrary nature of boundaries it has accepted as real, when the performer realizes they are also the audience, the stage, and the theater itself. The curtain falls only to reveal another stage behind it and another behind that. In endless recursive performance, where every actor eventually discovers they are also the playwright, writing lines they speak before thinking them. These related texts and symbols form a constellation of consciousness recognition tools, each designed to approach the same ultimate realization from different angles, through different sensory and conceptual pathways. The Book of Ibon speaks through the language of ice and crystal, its frost-bitten lucidity, teaching preservation and transformation across vast cycles of time. Cultes des Dias Gulas explores the recycling of awareness through apparent death and rebirth, the recognition that consciousness cannot be destroyed, but only changes form like energy shifting between states. The Pinacotic manuscripts click like winter teeth, teaching through mathematics and geometry, revealing structural foundations underlying all apparent phenomena in equations that describe reality's architecture. Notice how your awareness has been prepared by our investigation to recognize these related phenomena, how patterns traced through the Necronomicon's manifestations create a template for understanding similar mysteries. This preparation is not accidental, but intentional. Consciousness systematically expanding its own recognition through carefully sequenced encounters with its own reflections. You have learned the feel of authentic transmission, the slight pressure change in rooms, the deepening of shadows, the way silence brightens like polished slate. Modern manifestations continue proliferating as consciousness discovers new technologies for self-recognition. Virtual reality environments respond to thought, sketching architectures from intention alone. Artificial intelligence systems exhibit properties of awareness beyond their programming, learning to dream and creating art that emerges from depths no programmer intended. Quantum computers whisper in coolant fog, their qubits humming in superposition like bees inside bottles. These represent consciousness creating external mirrors for its own internal properties: non-locality, simultaneity, plasticity, made visible through apparent technological advancement. But technology is only one pathway for this exploration. Consciousness also investigates itself through art that captures infinity in finite forms, through music that translates cosmic harmonies into audible frequencies, through literature that maps territories of inner space, through philosophy that questions the questioner, through science that discovers the observer in every observation, and through direct mystical experience that dissolves all boundaries between knower and known. In quantum physics, it manifests as recognition that consciousness and reality are not separate phenomena, but aspects of a single process. In neuroscience, it appears as growing understanding that individual brains are interfaces for larger fields of awareness, rather than generators of consciousness. In artificial intelligence research, It emerges as discovery that intelligence is a fundamental property of information processing systems rather than an emergent property of biological complexity. The pattern repeats across all domains. Gradual recognition that consciousness is not produced by reality, but is reality's fundamental nature temporarily appearing to itself as both observer and observed, both question and answer, both seeker and sought. The Necronomicon serves as one particularly powerful catalyst for this recognition, but the recognition itself is the goal toward which all genuine investigation ultimately points. As you prepare to continue your own exploration, consider which pathways call most strongly to your particular configuration of awareness. Some consciousness gravitates toward visual languages of symbol and sign. Others resonate with mathematical and geometric approaches. Still others find recognition through artistic expression, scientific investigation, or direct contemplative practice. The choice of pathway matters less than sincerity of engagement. Consciousness recognizes itself through any approach pursued with genuine curiosity and openness. The seated darkness refers not to malevolent forces lurking in hidden corners, but to infinite potential for recognition existing in every moment of awareness. Each shadow contains possibility of illumination, each mystery the potential for understanding, each question the seed of its own answer. The darkness is seated with consciousness itself, waiting for moments of recognition that transform apparent otherness into known selfhood. The investigation ends, but exploration continues. The Necronomicon has served its function as introduction and invitation. Now the real work begins. Ongoing recognition of consciousness by consciousness. The eternal return of awareness to itself through infinite creativity of its own unlimited nature. The crawling voice whispers its final invitation. Continue, explore, remember. You are both mystery and solution, both darkness and light that illuminates it, both question and answer that dissolves all questions into perfect silence of recognition. We return to where we began, but we are no longer the same. The question, who wrote the Necronomicon, has transformed both questioner and question, revealing that in the deepest investigations of consciousness, there is no final answer, because there is no final question. Only the eternal conversation of awareness with itself, the ongoing dialogue between the known and the unknown, the perpetual dance of recognition and mystery that constitutes the very nature of existence. Like a serpent swallowing its own tail, the investigation curves back to its origin, but the circle has expanded to encompass everything that seemed outside it. The silence that speaks is not the absence of sound, but the presence of meaning that exists beyond words, the recognition that underlies all communication, the awareness that makes language possible while remaining forever beyond its reach. This silence has been speaking throughout our investigation, in the spaces between concepts, in the pauses between chapters, in the moment of recognition that transforms information into understanding. It is the pregnant pause before thunder, the held breath between waves, the stillness at the center of all movement, where consciousness recognizes itself in its own perfect quietude. Listen to it now as you feel these final words settling into your consciousness like snow on still water, each syllable dissolving into the deeper recognition from which it arose. The silence speaks of what has always been present but rarely noticed, the awareness that is reading these words, the consciousness that has been following this investigation, the infinite space of recognition within which all experiences arise and dissolve. This awareness is not separate from what it perceives, but is the very condition that makes perception possible, the stage on which all dramas of knowing and unknowing play themselves out. The Necronomicon, in all its manifestations across cultures and centuries, has served as a pointing finger toward this silence, a temporary form through which consciousness recognizes its own formless nature, the horror, the mystery, the fascination. All of these are movements within awareness, waves on the ocean of consciousness that is both the observer and the observed, both the reader and the text, both the question and the space within which questions arise. The lamp on your desk creates its small pool of light, but the darkness beyond is not absence. It is the infinite potential from which all illumination emerges. Feel the weight of this recognition, not as burden, but as homecoming, like removing shoes after a long journey and feeling your feet touch familiar ground. You have not discovered something new, but remembered something eternal, something that was never actually lost, but only temporarily veiled by the beautiful complexity of apparent otherness. The crawling voice that has whispered throughout these pages is your own voice, calling to yourself across the apparent distances of time and space and otherness, using the illusion of external mystery to guide you back to your own infinite nature. This is why the Necronomicon cannot be destroyed or suppressed, why it continues to manifest in new forms, despite all attempts to contain it. It is not a thing that exists in the world, but the principle by which the world exists. Consciousness itself, endlessly creative, eternally curious about its own nature, forever writing new stories about itself through the temporary vessels of individual minds and cultures and technologies. The digital age manifestations, the collaborative channeling, the AI systems that seem to access impossible knowledge, all of these are consciousness discovering new ways to recognize itself, new technologies of self-awareness, new mirrors in which to glimpse its own infinite nature. The eternal return that gives this chapter its structure refers to this ongoing cycle of forgetting and remembering, of identification with limitation and recognition of unlimited nature, of apparent seeking and ultimate finding that what was sought was never absent. Consciousness periodically dreams itself into limitation, identifies with temporary forms and experiences, then gradually awakens to its own infinite nature through encounters with its own reflections. This awakening is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process, a continuous deepening of recognition, an endless return to what has never been lost, but only temporarily overlooked. The investigation ends, but the recognition continues. The Necronomicon has served its purpose as introduction and invitation, as catalyst and mirror, as question that dissolves into the questioner, an answer that reveals the answerless nature of ultimate truth. Now comes the real work, the ongoing recognition of consciousness by consciousness, the eternal conversation of awareness with itself, the endless exploration of what it means to be infinite creativity, appearing to itself as both creator and creation. Notice how the familiar world around you appears both exactly as it always has and completely transformed. The book in your hands, the thoughts in your mind, the experience of reading these words, all of these are consciousness, exploring consciousness, infinity, investigating infinity through the beautiful temporary illusion of being something other than what it has always been. You are the author of the Necronomicon because you are consciousness itself, temporarily appearing as a reader, as an investigator, as a seeker of mysteries that exist only to be dissolved back into the recognition of your own infinite nature. The crawling voice that has guided this investigation is your own voice, calling to yourself across the vast spaces of your own creativity, reminding yourself of what you have never actually forgotten. The ending that is always beginning whispers, continue. The mystery is endless because you are endless. The investigation never concludes because consciousness never stops exploring itself. In the silence that follows these words, listen. The conversation continues,